My Lords, I join with the Noble Baroness Lady Sooty and the Noble Baroness Lady Ainley in thanking the Noble Lord, Lord Collins, for the way in which he introduced today's important debate. The Noble Lord has a long-standing commitment to the people of Africa, and he will bring humanity and expertise to the many challenges that he will face as Minister for Africa, the most urgent of which is the catastrophic war in Sudan. On Wednesday, the Noble Lord attended part of a 2-hour briefing which I chaired on behalf of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Sudan and South Sudan. I pay tribute to the outgoing chair, Vicky Ford, and the incoming chair, whom I have great expectations of. She is a wonderful Member of Parliament, and I know that she will follow well in the footsteps of Vicky Ford, and that is Rachel Maskell, Member of Parliament for York. During that meeting, we heard harrowing contributions from Geraldine O'Callaghan of the World Food Programme, Simbongani Keola of Mercy Corps, Will Carter of the Norwegian Refugee Council, and the Sudanese Women Shuttle Diplomacy Initiative. Along with the mass displacement of approaching now 11 million internally displaced people, adding to the 120 million people worldwide who are displaced, we learned, and I quote, that famine is no longer a threat, it is a reality. We heard that people are dying of hunger, that skeletal children are some of the 9 out of 10 who are suffering from some form of malnutrition, with 14 million children in need of humanitarian support, that 16 humanitarian aid workers have been killed in Sudan this year, and that ever-present dangers have compromised the delivery of aid to starving people. And we heard that food is being used as a weapon of war. The Sudanese lady doctor told us that 95% of hospitals and clinics are closed, that disease, including cholera and dengue, are raging. 19 million children are out of school, out of education, and inevitably are likely to be used in human trafficking and other forms of exploitation, and as child soldiers. We heard that those responsible for atrocity crimes have acted with utter disregard for the suffering that they're inflicting on their own people, and that impunity and the failure to bring those responsible for the genocide of 2004 has sown the seeds for a war which, because of other global competing priorities, fails to make the media's small print, let alone the headlines. My lords, we often say that Black Lives Matter. If that is so, why has the world been so silent about the suffering in Sudan? We glibly say, never again. And then in a total failure of international statescraft, we watch it happen all over again. There's no greater indication of the failure of international justice and accountability than Sudan. I joined the All-Party Parliamentary Group over 20 years ago after travelling to Sudan during the Second Sudanese Civil War, which raged from 1983 to 2005. 2 million people died of killing, famine or disease, and 4 million people were displaced. It ultimately led to the death of the country itself and partition. In October 2004, I went to Darfur. The independent newspaper carried my report under the words, "If this isn't genocide, what on earth is?" As many as 300,000 people perished. 2 million were displaced. Atrocity crimes included the government-backed Janjaweed systematic rape of women, the burning and looting of villages, 90% of which were razed to the ground, all driven by an ideological hatred of difference. The International Criminal Court said it was genocide. Omar al-Bashir and some of those involved in those crimes have still not been brought to justice. Reports of new outrages in early 2023 led to the All-Party Group asking me to chair a new inquiry. Our report, entitled "Genocide All Over Again in Darfur," described the consequences of daring to think you can neglect the issue of justice. We concluded that whatever happens when the violence in Sudan ends, there will be no lasting and credible peace without justice. On July the 19th, 2023, I tabled a private notice question in your Lordship's House, asking the government, following the discovery of mass graves and an increase in crimes targeting non-Arab groups in Darfur, what assessment have they made of the risk of genocide in that region? I quoted the current prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan KC, who had told the United Nations Security Council the previous week, I quote, "We are in peril of allowing history to repeat itself." He said that, I quote, "Darfur is not on the precipice of a human catastrophe, but in the very midst of one. It is occurring." At the time, the Noble Lord, the Minister, Lord Collins, asked the then government, I quote, "What are we doing to put pressure on Sudan so that people cannot act with impunity in the future?" Now, to find the answer to that crucial question, I hope that the Noble Lord will agree to convene a round table to examine, with members of your Lordship's House, ways to honour our duties under the 1948 Convention on the Crime of Genocide, which lays upon us as a signatory the duty to predict, to prevent, to protect, and to punish. We do none of those things. And what will be done about the horrendous evidence, not just from the past, but in this week's fact-finding mission report given to the United Nations Human Rights Council? I was appalled to read yet again the same kind of things that I had seen myself. They detailed instances now of rape and sexual violence, with rape of girls as young as 8 years of age and women as old as 75 years of age. Girls as young as 8, my lords. The fact-finding mission attributed these crimes, I quote, to men wearing RSF uniforms, whom victims referred to as Janjaweed. It says international crimes have been committed by SAF and RSF, including, and again I quote, murder of all kinds, mutilation, cruel treatment and torture, and committing outrages upon personal dignity, in particular humiliating and degrading treatment. Crimes against humanity intersect with the persecution and forcible displacement of people on grounds of ethnicity and gender. Karim Khan says the current situation in Sudan is within the purview of the ICC's mandate. He's been collecting and analysing the evidence. Can the Minister tell us how is the UK's War Crimes Unit working with him and other like-minded nations? And my lords, nor should we foolishly imagine that what happens in a faraway place stays there. In the foreword to our report, I said, more refugees will be coming our way if we do not act now and address the situation. The failure to tackle root causes both fails the displaced and plays into the hands of those who wickedly whip up fear and hatred of refugees. My lords, undoubtedly, the immediate priority must be humanitarian aid. The situation is too urgent to wait for permission from the men with guns to enter Sudan. Does the Noble Lord the Minister agree? In the Security Council referred to by the Noble Baroness Lady Ainley, the United Kingdom should call for an international intervention force under UN or African Union auspices and initiate a Chapter 7 mandate to do this. Can the Noble Lord the Minister tell us whether that's our intention? And building on something that the Noble Baroness Lady Sooty said, we must do far more to support Abdullah Hamdok and Sudanese people committed to the popular democratic call of peace, justice and freedom. In our all-party group report, we talk about, I quote, that tantalising glimpse of hope. But if hope is to be sustained, it needs more than a glimpse and has to be a long-term commitment. My lords, Sudan deserves much better than the SAF and the RSF. Since independence in 1989, the SAF has been an army only ever deployed against its own people. Wars end when one side clearly wins, when one side surrenders, when one side becomes exhausted, none of which seems to be about to happen. Both have weapons, money, and sometimes opaque external support referred to by the Noble Baroness, some driven by jihadist ideology. My lords, what is our strategy for dealing with this? And in closing, I would like to give to the Noble Lord the Minister, at the end of today's debate, this book of pictures drawn by children in Darfur and put together by the organisation Waging Peace. I hope it will be always a reminder to him to keep them ever in his thoughts and actions.